right, we'll go ahead and get started now. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today focused on going abroad for graduate school. We have three awesome panelists to share their experiences. First, I'll tell you a little bit about myself and who we have with us. My name is Brianne Holden, and I am part of the UC Davis Global Learning Hub, which you can probably see in my background right now. I'm an advising coordinator there. And with me, I have two of my colleagues who are co-hosting, Jenny Moylan and Janice C. And we're very happy to be able to put on this webinar today so that you can learn more about opportunities for graduate school overseas. We are putting this on behalf of the Global Learning Hub, and if you haven't had a chance to visit us at the Global Learning Hub, I'll share a little bit more about some of the opportunities at the end. But just to share briefly, the Global Learning Hub is a resource. It provides resources for all students for study abroad programs and USA-based study away, for global and virtual internships, research, global leadership, funding, and much more, inclusive of post-graduation opportunities, which I will show you at the end. While we go ahead and get started, I wanted to start with a poll to see what areas you're interested in, both in terms of your field and in terms of the region of the world that interests you. So I'm going to launch the poll now and give you a minute to go ahead and address that. And feel free to click on as many regions of the world that interest you. All right, if you haven't answered, I'll give you about 10 or so more seconds, and then I'll go ahead and share so we can see where your interests lie. Okay. I'll end poll now. Okay, let's share these results and see where the interests are. Okay, so it looks like a fair amount of you are interested in STEM fields, a few of you in visual and performing arts and humanities, languages, and literature. A number of you are interested in social science and/or education, international relations, global studies, and community development, and then some others as well. Okay, and if there are questions that come up along the way, feel free to put those in the Q&A. In terms of the region of the world, it looks like we have a lot of students interested in Asia and Europe, which is perfect. You'll be hearing about those regions today. So it looks like some of you are also interested in Latin America and the Caribbean, some of you North America, the Middle East, Oceania, and Sub-Saharan Africa. So we have a good amount there, which is great. Okay, so I want to go ahead, let's end that, and introduce our panelists briefly before we get started. So first, what we're going to do is I'll share a little bit about what today will look like. We'll have three panelists. We have two current students who are currently abroad and a student, not a student anymore, someone who has graduated with their degree from somewhere overseas as well. We're going to have each of them speak for about 6 to 7 minutes. We'll take some questions as we go as well, and then we'll try to leave plenty of time at the end so that you can address your questions. Janice is managing the Q&A box, so please do feel free to ask questions throughout, and we will get to your questions as best as we can. So in terms of our panelists today, the first person we'll hear from is Sarah Fountain, and Sarah is currently pursuing a master's degree in development and sociology and politics in Germany. So you'll hear more about her current educational pursuits in a moment. We'll also hear from Antonio Jackson, who's calling in from North Carolina. He received his Master's of Economics with a focus of international trade in 2017, and he pursued his degree at a university in China. And then you'll hear thirdly from Vida Sandu, and she is currently pursuing a master's degree in water management in the Netherlands. Vida is also a UC Davis alumni. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and welcome Sarah Fountain to talk first about her experiences with her master's program in Germany.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah, as Brianne just said, and I am currently doing my master's in development sociology and politics at the University of Bayreuth in Bayreuth, Germany. It's a small city that no one has ever heard of, about the size of Davis, and close to both Nuremberg and Frankfurt. So just a little bit of background about myself. I graduated from the University of the Pacific in Stockton in 2013 with a bachelor's in international development. And since graduating, I've kind of bopped around a little. I spent some time teaching English abroad in South Korea. I worked for several years at a nonprofit implementing USAID funded development programs. And I worked at the UC Davis Study Abroad office. So I'm familiar with where most of you are coming from too. And then I started my master's here in Germany last fall, so in 2019, and it's a 2-year program, so I expect to be finished in 2021. So I'm here in Germany together with my husband, who's also studying for his master's at the same time. We had talked for years before we actually ended up coming about doing this, and it finally happened last year. And so for me, finding the right school was partly about finding the right program for me, and also about finding the university that had both the program that I wanted to study in English and the program that he wanted to study in English. So that's why we ended up in this small city that no one has heard of. It's because it happens to offer these 2 programs. And to find the right school here in Germany, I really relied heavily on the DAAD, which is the German Academic Exchange Service. And they have a really great website with a lot of information about generally studying in Germany, as well as scholarships, and a really excellent search function that lets you filter by degree type and language of instruction and specialty and all of that. So that's really how I found this particular program after having already decided that I wanted to come to Germany specifically. And then I'll give you a little bit of rundown of sort of the process to apply, since it's still kind of fresh in my mind, since this is still my first year here. It was really easy to apply to this program, and I think to most programs in German universities, in that there's no test scores. At least this is for the social sciences. The hard sciences might be completely different, but there were no test scores. I didn't have to do the GRE. The application is free. It's fully online. I had no interview. We did find, so my husband and I were applying at the same time, and for my program, I didn't have to submit any personal statements or thesis topic proposals, but he did have to submit thesis topic proposals. So that being said, take all of my experiences with a grain of salt, because even within the same university, we've found that there's a lot of differences between these kinds of things. And once I was accepted, I was kind of surprised to find that I didn't have to confirm my place in the program, like is the case with a lot of US universities. They just kind of expect you to show up at the beginning of the semester and register yourself in person at the student registration office, which is kind of nice because it means you have a lot of leeway. You don't have to decide too early. You have a lot of time to figure out all the details of moving abroad and all that. And if something happens, then you're not tied into anything, which is nice. And one of my main motivations for coming to Germany for grad school is that state universities here don't charge any tuition, even for international students, which means that I only pay student fees, which at the moment are 109 euros per semester, which is about $118. And that includes my 6-month pass for all public transportation in the city. So that means for my 2-year program, I will pay like $500 for my entire master's degree, which is amazing. And really not something that's feasible in the US unless you just have a great scholarship. There is, of course, still tricky things with funding to come to Germany, mainly that in order to get a student residence permit to live and study here, you have to prove to the German government that you have the finances to pay for your living expenses while you are here as a student. And the German government sets the amount that they think that you need for your living expenses, which is currently 853 euros per month, which is about $920 per month. And that works out to about $11,000 per year of study, which is a lot upfront that you have to have either literally have that much money, put it in a German bank account, or you can prove that through like your parents' finances or a scholarship. But neither of those worked out for me. So I had been saving for years to make this happen. And it is a big financial commitment. But that being said, without tuition, you know, I haven't taken out any student loans, and I expect to fully finish the program without any debt, which is great. And it's also remarkable how much cheaper the cost of living is here. I would say my expenses are less than half of what they were when I was living in Sacramento just before moving here. So that's been a great change coming here. I've been generally quite happy with my study program here. I'm especially excited that I was able to find a program that's not just studying international development, which is what I wanted, but also international development with a focus on sub-Saharan Africa, which means that almost all of my professors focus their research on Africa, and the university has a really prestigious, what they call the Africa Multiple Cluster of Excellence. So there's always African scholars on campus giving guest lectures and stuff, which is super cool for me. But getting used to the German academic system here has been very strange. The strangest thing I'll say before I stop, and please feel free to ask me any questions you have after, but is I'm so used to the US system where there's quizzes and assignments and maybe short papers during the semester, or at least a midterm, and here there is none of that. You have no assignments, no feedback during the semester, and your entire grade rests on your final exam or final paper, which puts a lot of pressure on that. But, and now after having just gotten used to that after one semester here in the fall, everything has now changed given the coronavirus pandemic, as I'm sure all of you are having a lot of fun with those changes as well. So everything is online now, and it's kind of throwing everything off again after I had just gotten used to something after one semester. But generally speaking, I'm so far very glad that I am here pursuing my master's degree in Germany. And I would love to answer any of your questions as much as I can after the rest of the panelists speak.
Thank you, Sarah. And Ashley, Janice, do we have any questions that we might want to that are well addressed to Sarah that we should answer right now?
Yeah, it looks like there's one specific question that says, does your master's program offer a salary through TAing or research?
Great question. No, it does not. I do have the ability to work part-time here on the student residence permit, and there are some on-campus like student assistant research type jobs. I just had gotten my residence permit figured out in January and was going to start looking for a student assistant job, and then the pandemic happened. But no, it's not built into the program at my university.
Thanks, Sarah. We will answer additional Q&As towards the end. We'll try to answer one or two questions as we go, and then also being mindful of time, we want to make sure to give all of our panelists the time to speak about their experiences. So Antonio, we'll go ahead and move it over to you if you could share your experiences with your master's degree in China.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. As she said, I'm Antonio, and I received my Master's of Economics in International Trade from Shaman University, which is located in Fujian Province, China, which is like southeast China. And Shaman itself is a small city by Chinese standards. It's an island of about 8 million people, which in China is small. So the reason why I chose to go to Shaman University is because at first I knew I wanted to get my master's in economics. In undergrad, I studied international relations and also Chinese as well. And in studying international relations, I just saw how important like economics was, how because a lot of times countries relate on an economic level. So I definitely just wanted to pursue that for my master's studies. And at the time when I began applying in early 2015, I was actually living in China. At the time I was teaching English. And I knew at that point I wanted to stay in China for a couple more years. So at first I began to just research like different programs in China. And I found that Shaman University School of Economics is one of the top programs in the country. So that was one of the reasons that drew me to that university specifically. And as Sarah was mentioning, we also have a website as well where you can find out about a lot of different programs in China, and it's called studyinchina.csc.edu.cn. And in that program, you can filter out whether you want to program in English or in Chinese, like what majors you want, and things like that. So that was a very useful resource that I used. And another reason why I wanted to go to Shaman University was because during my undergraduate degree, I actually studied there for a semester. So it had a bit of familiarity to me. So that was why I wanted to go back. And prior to going there, I did research whether the university's accreditation would be recognized here in the US. And in the case of Shaman University, that wasn't the case, but I was very confident in that the things that I learned over there and the work that I did, like those skills would definitely be transferable. So I wasn't really too concerned about that. And also, in terms of funding for the program, for a lot of programs in China, they provide very generous scholarships. So prior to applying, I found out about a scholarship in China called the Sino-Us Exchange Scholarship. And this is a completely full scholarship for master's studies. It covers accommodation, admission costs, like all of that. And it also comes with a stipend as well. So we received about 3,000 RMB a month, which is the equivalent of maybe like $500. So, I mean, it's not like a crazy amount of money, but the cost of living in China is like pretty low. Like most times I would only spend maybe like a third of that. So that was really great to have. And also, in terms of the application process, it was very similar to Sarah's in that it was very straightforward. You just had to fill in information about your name, passport, stuff like that. The GRE wasn't required, but it could make your application more competitive. So I had actually taken the GRE before because I wasn't sure whether I was going to study in the US or in China. So I sent off my score, but it wasn't necessary. And ultimately, I think the reason why I chose to study in China was one, because of the cost. So the program was like fully funded, so I didn't have to take out any loans or have to worry about that. So the cost was a very big motivator for me. And also too, just because I was familiar with the school as well, and it was also highly ranked within China. And let's see. And in terms of what was the culture of the school like, it was, I think it depends on the school, but at least for Shaman, it was a bit of the division between the foreigners and the Chinese people. I speak pretty good Chinese, but like there are a little bit of like cultural barriers sometimes. So I kind of mostly hung out with like my other international colleagues, and yeah, so it was a bit of a division there. But one of the most interesting things about the program is that the students come from many, many different places. So I had classmates from Ghana, Nigeria, Spain, Russia, just all over the world. So that was really cool to be able to just interact with such a diverse like student base. So that was really great. And let's see. And I guess some of the challenges involved with going to school abroad is one of the biggest things is there could be a language barrier at times. So for me, I studied Chinese before I arrived, so I didn't have that issue. But for other classmates, like there were times where maybe they would have to just do something as like normal as like trying to get a phone or trying to open a bank account. Like in your home country, that's very easy, but when you're abroad, that's something that you have to think about as well. Like that's something else that you have to navigate. And yeah, so if you have any questions about studying abroad in Asia or in China, I would be happy to answer them.
Thanks, Antonio.
Ashley, do we have any particular questions that we should answer right now?
There was one question, but I think I've got the scholarship website correct. And correct me if I'm wrong. studyinchina.csc.edu.cn.
Correct.
Okay, great. So I put that into the question and answer box. So you guys should be able to see that response. But that looks like the only specific question that came up from right now, aside from some general ones that I think we can address at the end. Actually, there is a question that just came in, and it says, both Sarah and Antonio mentioned how they taught English abroad. And I was just wondering how they found those programs. I think that in the case of Antonio and how he went and taught English and loved it so much he wanted to stay is really cool.
Oh, okay. Good question. So I found out about this program through my Chinese teacher. She just like sent out an email during our senior year saying this is a really interesting program where you can like teach abroad in China. And now I think the program no longer exists. I think after maybe my second or third year, I guess they ended it. But it was just a really great way to kind of like go back into China. And yeah, I mean, I think teaching abroad is a really great opportunity.
Great, thanks Ashley, and thank you Antonio. And at the end of this presentation, for the student who's interested, or for those of you who are interested in other types of post-graduation opportunities, potentially teaching English abroad or more resources for graduate school, I will show you where on the website you can find those additional resources, inclusive of some funding opportunities. So we'll circle back to that question at the end as well. So now we'll go ahead and hear from our third panelist, Vida, who will speak to us about water management, her master's in water management in the Netherlands.
Thanks, Brienne. As she said, I'm Vida, and I'm currently in Delft in the Netherlands, which is about an hour away from Amsterdam, studying at the Technical University of Delft, which is a very, like it says Technical University, but it's truly all engineering and sciences over here. So I'm now working on my thesis project, so I'm graduating hopefully in the fall if everything goes well. So good timing for Corona because I didn't have any classes left, just the thesis project. But maybe I can tell a little bit more background. As she said before, I graduated UC Davis just in 2018, so I did the whole straight from undergrad to grad school thing, which worked out okay and very well actually. But basically, I didn't plan to go straight from bachelor's to grad school, but I ended up having a very kind of life-changing experience in study abroad, actually. I went and did a program called the Sustainable Cities of Northern Europe, where we traveled from Sweden to Denmark to Germany to Switzerland, learning about the sustainability of European cities and how they're designed. And I got a bit of a look at the technical background of those cities and sort of more engineering-based things because I studied environmental science at Davis, which is yeah, more science background, but I was sort of very interested in the engineering aspect that I got to learn when I was in Europe. And it also sort of showed me during study abroad that in Europe and other countries, there's a bit of a different attitude towards the environment and sustainability in general, which got me excited for studying more. And I felt in my senior year that I hadn't gotten to take all the technical classes I wanted, and I didn't have that background that I would like to start working. So I thought I'll just apply to grad schools in Europe. And if it doesn't work, I thought this the whole time, I'll just apply another year. But this will be practice. And in the end, it wasn't practice because I got in, but it was really helpful to have that for myself, that if it doesn't work out now, it'll work out when it works out. And I think that's a good attitude for myself and maybe for others. But yeah, so I applied. Originally, I was looking at schools in Germany as well, because as Sarah said, they are free and I was interested in that. But however, the programs that I'm looking at, I was wanting to study hydrology or water management. And those programs in Germany are often in German. There are a few that were close to what I was looking for. And so I flagged a few places, and then there was a good one in Sweden, and then of course in the Netherlands in Delft. And I basically found these by looking at hydrology programs across Europe, just Googling and going on all these various databases that have been mentioned. And in the end, the first two deadlines, I had a whole schedule of when the applications were. The first two deadlines were Stockholm and Delft, and I applied to those and got into both and ended up picking the more technical university because I was looking for an engineering background, which I was also grateful that they gave me that opportunity because I studied science and I would have to go back in the US and do an engineering degree if I wanted to get anything more technical. And although I'm not planning on working as an engineer, I kind of wanted a little more of that background. So I was grateful to have the degree I'm doing is actually civil engineering, water management. So I'm happy to get that technical training. But anyways, more about application project. Like I was looking for countries that would have English programs. That was a big focus, obviously. But in the end, even though I applied to Delft because of the English program, I ended up learning Dutch, which is amazing and has really served me quite a lot because the university offers free Dutch classes. And I took a few of those, and everyone here speaks fluent English, but it really helps to know a little bit, goes a long way in terms of just being at the grocery store or the market. And the university is also really supportive of international students. When I moved here, they made the process really easy. I had to do the thing that Sarah also said, which was prove that I could pay for a year of living expenses, which was really tough. And I had to work that out with my parents and take some loans, but we made it work, and I'm really grateful for their support there. But once I made it here, the university had an international program for 2 weeks where they basically set you up with the visa, with the healthcare, with registering your living places, and all of that was super easy. They just like funneled us in, and then they gave us 2 weeks to get to know other international students and get used to it before school started, which was good because school here, it was a lot different than I was used to at UC Davis. Again, like Sarah said, everything is nothing until exam period. So you have these 8 weeks of just sort of trying to learn what's going on, and then 2 weeks of really intense exams, which I've never had experienced anything like that because the exams are 3 hours and they're very difficult to pass because here you can just keep retaking classes until you pass them. You can take the test pretty much every 8 weeks. So they make them quite difficult and they expect you to pass them only if you've mastered it, which I'm super grateful for because I feel like I got a lot more learning than I would have if I had just skated by with a bad grade in the US. I'm really learning things here and I'm doing great. And I am also had the opportunity to work along with this master's. So I now work for a remote sensing company 1 day a week because they do have a limit in terms of hours for my student visa. But it's been a pretty sweet life in the Netherlands, and I'm having a hard time wanting to go home. But I'm so grateful that I chose to study here for the life experience, but also for the study experience. I think it's been a really solid place. Thanks.
Thanks, Vita. Ashley, before we open it up to all questions, are there any particular questions that we can ask Vita to draw on?
I think this one would be appropriate for Vita. So it says, how unique is it that that Germany's graduate programs do not charge tuition? Is this the norm for European graduate programs or a special case? So I guess from your experience, what has the tuition been like and how much has it varied?
I have to unmute myself. I forgot about that. The program I was looking at in Stockholm and in the Netherlands were both quite a bit more expensive. They're pretty much the same price as UC Davis, so about $14,000 a year for international tuition, which is astronomical compared to most places in Germany are indeed, you pay student fees. So I think it's pretty unique to Germany compared to the other European countries. It's usually around that much. Sweden was a bit more expensive, and there were some places in Denmark that were also around 18,000 or so, but I think it's a bit unique to Germany.
Great, thank you. And then I think the rest of the questions that I see would also be applicable to hear from each of the panelists.
Great, let's go ahead and open it up to the Q&A, and Ashley, please feel free to ask away.
All right, so let's start with this first one. It was, what was finding housing like? Did the university you attend help you with that? So do you want to start with Sarah? Do you want to answer that one first?
Sure. Yeah, so the housing situation is definitely different from a lot of universities in the US. Granted, I have never been a graduate student in the US, so I don't know what it's like for that. But, you know, for undergrad, I like lived in the dorms. It was kind of accepted that the university would provide you housing, at least at the beginning. But that's not the case here. My university, and I think most universities in Germany, have some like sort of affiliated student dorm buildings, but you're definitely not guaranteed a room, and you have to apply really early. I didn't want to live in one of those anyway. As I said, I'm here with my husband, and that wasn't going to work to live in a student dorm. So we did have to find our own apartment, which was pretty easy. There's a lot of sites here, just like back home, where you can search for things. We did get help from the international office to sort of help us talk with our landlords. Even though my husband speaks German, there were a couple things that we just like couldn't quite get across. So they did help us talk through those things with our landlords. But otherwise, we were on our own for finding housing.
Great, thanks, Sarah. How about you, Antonio?
So for me, so at the university I was at, Shaman University, there was kind of like a housing, there have on-campus dorms, but there was a shortage during my year. Because typically master students, like you're supposed to only have like one roommate, PhD students have no roommates. And for undergrad, it's like a room with like 4 people. But like during my year, there was during the first semester, there was a shortage. So we ended up having to have a room with like 4 other people, which was like very crazy. But like in China, that's normal. Like the Chinese dorms have even more people in the room than that. But yeah, so you could either stay in the on-campus dorms or near campus. There were like kind of university affiliated apartments that you could stay at as well.
Great. How about for you, Vida?
Yeah, TU Delft offers international housing, but again, you have to sign up early, like as soon as you get accepted, basically, and they had a limited number and you had to pay a fee. And I also didn't really want to live in a place like that. In the end, I knew people who lived there and they were nice places on campus, but they weren't super cozy. So I looked for a student house here, and there were websites. I actually knew a guy who was from the Netherlands when I was applying, so he helped me with looking at the housing websites, and I ended up doing like a Skype call with a house here that then wanted me to live with them. So it worked out okay, but it was a bit scary to be applying to houses from abroad. But I feel the university makes it really easy for international students. If you don't want to deal with that, you just sign up for the international housing. Yeah.
Great, thank you. The next question I think would also be applicable to all of you. There have been 2 questions that had come about, but wondering if pursuing higher education abroad, if you were ever worried that it would be considered valid in the US when you're applying to professional jobs, and is there any way to see if one type of degree or university would be more valued than another? Vida, do you want to take that one first for us?
Yeah, sure. My dad, that was a big concern of my dad when I told him I wanted to go abroad. But the way I looked at it is I looked at some rankings. There are several different ones, and I just checked TU Delft against all of them, especially the civil engineering department, and got a gauge that it's a pretty well-known civil engineering program over there. And I also spoke with some professors, and they also knew the program, so I felt a bit reassured that it's known in my field and that it would be respected. In terms of accreditation, if I wanted to be an engineer in the US, of course, I would have to take the US engineering exam anyways. So I wasn't too worried about that. I guess that's my answer.
Thank you. How about for you, Antonio?
Yeah, I kind of touched on this a bit, like during my introduction, but I guess I wasn't really as worried about it, just because I know that the information, the knowledge that I was learning there, like I could easily apply it to like a position in the US. And then while I was also there, I also interned with one of the largest trade and logistics firms like within like that region. So I just know that like the experience and the knowledge that I have, I could apply that to the US. So I wasn't really as worried about the accreditation.
Thank you. And how about for you, Sarah?
Yeah, I'm kind of was thinking along the same lines as Antonio, where especially in the field of international development that I plan to work in after this, having a degree from a US university isn't as important. And given that I'm studying more of a social science, it's less about, you know, there's no exam, there's no international development exam I'm going to have to take in order to practice somewhere. So I was more concerned about making sure that the program itself was going to teach me what I wanted to learn.
Great.
I wanted to just jump in, sorry, really quick, Ashley, that for whatever degree that you're looking at, please do your due diligence to see what's required. If you plan to come back to the US after pursuing a degree overseas, some degrees, like for example, medicine, or as Vita was saying too, they might require you to have particular classes or even degrees, or even if you're looking to practice certain career fields, you might need to have an accredited degree from the US. Those are things that you'll definitely need to look into. For example, if you want to be a teacher, you're going to need to get accredited by a particular state that you want to practice teaching in, things like that. So please do your due diligence to take a look. As all of our panelists have pointed out, it varies widely depending on your field of interest. And so these are their perspectives for their fields of interest that may or may not look similar to yours.
Okay, there is another question here that says, do you folks recommend acquiring experience before applying to top programs in England and Europe? I'm going to guess that they might be referring to some professional experience, maybe some work experience. If you guys want to touch on that question. Anybody want to start?
I would love to start. So I waited 6 years between finishing my bachelor's and starting my graduate degree. I actually, when I was a senior in my undergrad, I had applied to master's programs, also abroad, but in the UK. Ended up not pursuing that at that time, partly because of the finances and partly because I decided I really did want to get some real world experience, mostly to make sure that what I was going to study in graduate school was actually what I wanted to pursue. I felt like after my bachelor's, I had a great academic foundation, but not enough real world knowledge to really ensure that it was worth the time and money that you have to put into doing a graduate degree. So I personally recommend it on a personal level. In terms of like getting into programs, I'm not sure, but just on a personal level, I definitely recommend getting some experience first.
Yeah, I can add to that a different perspective, which is I always thought the way Sarah did, that I would spend a lot of time working and that I wanted to have a break between my studies. And I still think that would have been a good idea if not for the fact that I felt in my senior year that I had just started doing the thing I wanted to do. And so if you had that feeling, for me, it was really necessary to continue my education because I had the feeling. For my studies, I did environmental science, and then the last year was watershed science, which was then hydrology, which was then water management. And I was like, well, now I'm just starting to do what I want to do, and I'm not done at all. And so that basically spurred me to apply for more things. And I had the feeling indeed that if I didn't work, I wouldn't get in. So I thought I'll just try, and then I'll work if that doesn't work. And I think in the end, it worked out without me having very much work experience, but that's probably not the case for every university or every subject. So in general, I think it is a good idea as well.
Antonio, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think they did a very great job of answering the question.
Okay, perfect. We'll move on to the next one, but maybe we'll start with you, Antonio. The question says, how are our degrees from the US viewed in Europe? What is the GPA conversion like? Does it set US applicants back?
I mean, I guess I can't really speak on how it is in Europe, but in Asia, the GPA is calculated pretty much the same way. And in terms of like class structure, I know Vida and Sarah were saying that it's kind of just like one big exam at the end. But for my master's, like we kind of had like quizzes and tests, and we also had exams, but it was kind of set up the same way as it was in the US.
If anything, I think it might have helped in some ways, because in the Netherlands, it's very hard to get good grades here. I mean, they have a scale from 1 to 10, but hardly anyone gets higher than an 8. That's just not happening. And so the requirement to apply was that you had 75% of your GPA. So I would need to have a 3.0 basically, which I think is a lot easier to do in the US than to have an average of a 7 here in the Netherlands. So I think this technical university is quite hard for Dutch people to get into, because you have to have 75%, and indeed it's the same, but I think it worked out in my favor.
I think it might be kind of similar here in Germany, that it's almost a bit of an advantage to have a GPA calculated in the US way, just given the system of everything riding on one exam or paper. And then just to fun little anecdote kind of thing, like if you do decide to go abroad, along with all of the different, class structure and all of that, you're also going to have to learn a new grading structure. As Vida just said, in the Netherlands, it's 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest. In Germany, it's 5 to 1, with 1 being the best. And it's still really weird to me to see like a 2.0 and a 2 and have that be considered one of the best grades, when I'm like, but where's the 100%? And that ties into how the GPA is calculated as well. So initially, even when I was looking at programs, and the entrance requirements would be listed, and they would say the German grade that you had to have, and I would have to be Googling all the time, like, how do I convert my US GPA to a German GPA? And they all do it differently, and you can't really be sure. So all of that being said, especially if the applications are free, I would just apply. If you're not sure if your GPA fits, just apply. It never hurts, unless it's not free.
Okay, thank you. There's another question that I think you guys may have touched on in the beginning, but if we want to sort of recap, what are some good ways to start for looking for these programs? Would you recommend choosing a country first and then looking at schools or programs, or vice versa, or another technique?
Well, I guess I can start off for that one. So at the time, I was in China, and I knew that's where I wanted to stay. So it was kind of easy for me to kind of like pick the country up front. So like once you know like where you want to go, at least in Asia, I think it's kind of the best thing to do is to find the country first. I would imagine in Europe, I mean, because it's like so interconnected. I mean, maybe you can like do like different programs in other places. But for me, I guess I picked the country first, and then I found the program.
Yeah, I mean, if it's super clear what you want to do, in my case, like I had a very specific program I was looking for grad school, and then I was just looking to see where that program exists, which is another way to do it, because in every country in Europe, they didn't have the program I was looking for. It was only pretty much in Germany and Sweden and the Netherlands. So that's another way. If you have a very specific tailor sort of thing that you're looking for, you can also just find out, again, within a region. Otherwise, you're looking in every country in the world, but you can just look for, is this program? I can't tell you how many descriptions of programs I read before, and then I would just throw it out, like, this one, no, this isn't for me. Okay, read this description, no. And that's also quite, I think, helped me find exactly what I wanted.
Anything you wanted to add, Sarah?
I think they pretty much covered it. It depends on where your starting point is.
Great. I think a lot of you guys sort of touched on this, but there's a question about tuition and fees. It says the tuition and fees are none. How are you able to afford housing and the cost of living? I know a couple of you have mentioned savings and other jobs, but if you have anything that you wanted to add on that note.
I mean, I would just add, so this didn't ultimately work out for me coming to Germany, but I would definitely suggest applying to all the scholarships you can find. For example, for Germany, I had mentioned earlier the DAAD website that has a lot of information, and this organization offers their own scholarships for international students that cover the full cost of living that's required by the German government. So again, I applied for one and wasn't successful, but for example, there's another American student in my program here who was successful. So he's having all of his living costs paid for through that scholarship. There's also a lot of other smaller scholarships. So that's always something you should look into. And that's another one of the reasons that I waited so long to come to graduate school, was because I knew that I had to have that savings built up in case the scholarships didn't work out. So it is sometimes one of those things that you might just have to plan for in advance a little bit more.
All right, how about you, Antonio?
Yeah, so for me, I was fortunate enough to get the scholarship, so I didn't have to worry about like expenses, like to cover like housing and food and stuff like that. But also on the side, I was kind of working, which is technically illegal in China, so maybe you shouldn't do that. But it's usually like pretty easy to find like a job like tutoring someone or teaching or something like that. So I kind of just like did that on the side just for extra money.
Anything you wanted to add, Vida?
Yeah, I think I already said it, but that I took out some loans, which hopefully I can earn back. But I also have been working since I've been here, which has been helped cover my living costs, at least rent and food. So it's just the tuition that's going to come back later. But at least I think it'll work out in the end.
Great. There is another question that says, would you be able to talk about any physical or mental health resources that you have access to being at your university and how you felt supported in that regard?
Oh, I mean, so in China, the sort of like mental health and the mental health, like it isn't really as talked about there. So there aren't really sort of like counseling resources or anything like that, unfortunately. Um, yeah, so there was like a severe lack of that at my university.
I had a bit of the opposite experience because in the Netherlands, there's this concept of a burnout, they call it, which is when you overwork yourself in school and then you need some time to recover. And it's a well-known thing that people get diagnosed with, and it happens to a lot of people. So they have like a very strong support network for students who are overworked or missing home. There's all kinds of counseling that they really make you aware of as an international student, but just as a student in general. And people are really asking, like, are you overworking? Stop working at 5, like that, just, be okay. And I think that really was surprising to me and very different than America, and was really helpful in the transition.
And then in Germany, I'd say it's kind of between the two, where the university itself doesn't really offer those kinds of services, which is partly linked to the fact that they don't charge tuition, that a lot of those sort of extra services that you're used to in the US don't exist at the university. But for example, for mental health services, I have now in Germany extremely good health insurance, and I could easily access those kinds of services through the standard health insurance system here, just not through the university.
Great, thank you. And so I think that just sort of highlights the idea of how important it is to sort of look into that support. And if you aren't going to be able to get the support that you want, to make sure that you are aware of maybe some other additional resources that you can tap into if you are needing to use them. The next question is talking a little bit about transitioning to living abroad. Did any of you struggle being away from your family and or other networks when you moved? I've been wondering that since it was an experience of mine when I studied abroad. Sarah, do you want to start for us?
Sure. I mean, I think, as I said earlier, kind of just been jumping around to new places in the world and the US every couple of years since I graduated from my undergrad. So it wasn't, moving far away from family and that type of thing wasn't in itself a huge transition for me. I also did come with my husband, so that comes with like an automatic built-in family. But just like a really quick tip, I would say, about transitioning to living abroad, especially when you're going to start a new study program, is to arrive a couple weeks early if you can, to sort of help yourself get acclimated to the city you're in. Maybe you have to like finalize the housing. For example, I didn't have an apartment found before I came here. I was living in an Airbnb for a couple weeks. And that would have been really stressful to do if I was also starting classes at the same time. So I would say generally arrive early if you can.
And how about for you, Vida?
Yeah, I would say that's really good advice from Sarah. I also did that, partially because my rent started earlier. And that really helped to have a moment to get furniture, because this is an unfurnished room, and to sort of learn a few Dutch words and get to know some people before I started my studies. Because once that started, I mean, I lived in Davis. I grew up in Davis. I went to UC Davis, and then I decided to move to the Netherlands. So it was quite a change for me to be so far away from everyone I knew. But being able to have a moment to get to know people and sort of resettle before being nonstop busy with classes, which was also an easy way to adjust because there was just nothing for me to do but school. So it wasn't so hard in the end. But I think indeed really take time to settle before you jump into a program that's going to be demanding, especially a master's program.
And Antonio.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with everything they said. So similar to Sarah, like I had been traveling like so much, like even during like summers and like semesters, I did summers and semesters abroad, like in college, and I was living in China and stuff like that. So my family was already used, my family and friends were used to me just like being overseas. And like with the advances made in technology, you can always like FaceTime or Skype and stuff like that. And that definitely bridges the distance.
I think this might be a good time to segue into some more general questions that Bree, I think you might be able to address. One of them was a question, the GRE was mentioned. So if you can talk a little bit about what the GRE is. And then I think you're gonna also go into some researches on PhD programs in Europe, if that's something that we have information about.
Yeah, I'm happy to generally address some of these. I will say some of this, where I am not a graduate studies advisor, and so I do recommend talking to, I believe it's our pre-graduate studies advising. There is an office that you can go to and chat with someone and get career enhancement. I definitely recommend going to the Internship and Career Center, where you can talk to them about potentially getting career development enhancement prior to applying to graduate school as well. I know some of our panelists had talked about that. The GRE is a test score that's required for some schools. I think the US tends to use it as a higher rate. I myself had to take the GRE as a test to apply to graduate school within the US. Not all schools require it in the US, and certainly not all schools require it overseas. It's a test that's comprised of three areas of study. One is more focused on mathematics and quantitative analysis. Another is on writing, and another is on vocabulary. There are many test resources on the GRE, for the GRE, both in terms of classes that students can participate in, I believe even on campus. That would be one area to look into. Something to keep in mind is depending on your field of study, you may or may not need to take the GRE. So if you're looking to do something in law, you definitely, if you're looking to go to law school, you would not take the GRE most likely. If you're looking to do medical school, you're probably not going to take the GRE because they require different types of tests. And so just keep in mind that depending on your field of study and depending on the school, you may or may not require the GRE may or may not be required. If there are any particular questions about the GRE, definitely feel free to reach out, but really I'd recommend talking to one, the ICC, and two, pre-graduate school advising as well. Ashley, did you say there's a second part of that question?
There's sort of like a half, but I think you addressed it. One was asking about getting paid to go to grad school, that's a possibility, but I think that pre-graduate school resource you mentioned would be a good one. And then also in terms of PhDs abroad, if that's an option as well.
because we only have 3 more minutes and I want to be mindful of time and show a few more resources, I don't think I'd be able to talk very much about PhDs. And since our panelists had pursued master's degrees, I won't call on them to answer that either. I do think it's important that whatever PhD program you're looking into, that whether it's US based or international, that you really do your due diligence to research the types of advisors that you'd be interested in doing research and working on projects with. That research is a pretty key piece of an advanced degree at a PhD level. And I think there was a question about getting paid, and that's going to vary widely depending on the program for master's or PhD programs. I did my master's program in the US, and I did have a job and was able to fund my MA program. And I'm currently in a doctorate program, and I actually do have to pay. So it very much varies depending on the type of program that you're interested in. And I'm sorry that that's fairly vague, but I don't want to mislead anyone by any means. I'm going to take these last 2 minutes to share my screen and show you where to find additional resources. Let me pull this up really quick. Okay, let's see, share screen. Okay, Ashley, can you confirm, do you see the Global Learning Hub website up?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so this is the Global Learning website, and here's where you can find more information to help you assess what types of postgraduate opportunities that you'd like. This is also a great resource for those of you who are interested in programs like internships, study abroad. We have a number of different opportunities. We are now operating with virtual global learning opportunities as well. So if you were interested in virtual internships where you could potentially work with a supervisor overseas and get a sense of what working overseas looks like, this is a great place to take a look. We have research opportunities that can help you prepare for graduate school, community-based projects. Blum Center is definitely a great resource for funding projects that are focused on poverty alleviation, global leadership, and then finally at the bottom, you'll see after graduation. If you click on this, you'll see a number of different types of opportunities, some general guidelines, volunteer services abroad that you could look into, many opportunities within teaching abroad. And I know a student had asked about that earlier. So these are some that are well vetted. They're through governments overseas, for example. We have some Fulbright information, work information, and if you scroll down, you'll see graduate school. By no means is this going to be an extensive list because graduate schools, there are so many across the world. And so it is important to continue your research with that, but at least this can be a potential starting point for you to take a look at. Additionally, we have some funding opportunities, some information about that. And then one resource I wanted to point in to your attention is Going Global. This is a resource that has many jobs and internships overseas that could maybe help you if you wanted to potentially do something similar to Antonio and maybe go overseas and see if you like it and then maybe apply to graduate school. This could be a great resource for you as well. One last thing, as it is at the 1 o'clock hour, we are thinking we will continue to do webinars. If there are particular elements that you would like to actually hear from us, whether it's about teaching English, graduate school part 2, if there are other elements where you would really like to learn more on how to enhance your global learning professional development, please go ahead and go to the events calendar that's listed right here, and you can see all upcoming webinars. So with that said, I'll go ahead and stopping share. And that brings us to the 1 o'clock hour. So we're out of time. I will go ahead and let you know if you wanted to reach out to any of the panelists, you can go ahead and at least contact me and I can filter them. My email address is bholden@ucdavis.edu. Panelists, if you're interested in having students contact you, please do feel free to share your contact information as well. That won't be anything that's expected of you, but if that is something of interest of you being contacted, feel free to unmute yourselves and you can share your contact information.
Hey, yeah, I mean, I would be, you can go.
Yeah, just if anyone is interested in reaching out about questions about Germany, you are more than welcome to email me. I'll put my email in the chat right now, so you don't have to try to write it down. But yeah, feel free to reach out. I'll do my best to answer what I can.
Yeah, and likewise, if you have any questions about studying in China or studying abroad in general, you can feel free to shoot me an email and I'll add that to the chat as well.
I'll just
Great.
say so.
And I've just opened the chat for you to do that. And I will add mine for any questions about the Global Learning Hub that you have. Okay. And we do have you as registered to this. So if there's any follow-up questions, feel free to either reach out to us. If we see additional follow-up questions that we can easily address, we can also reach out to you and save this information. So that is it for now. And it looks like we have all of our panelists who have shared their emails. Thank you, panelists. Please do feel free to take a quick photo of those as we wrap up. And we'll stop there since we're out of time. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and thank you to our panelists for joining us. We really appreciate your time today. And everyone stay safe and take care. Have a good rest of your week.